In Search of the Miraculous by P.D. Ouspensky. Chapter 1. I did not understand what G meant by proper mind, and understood it only much later. And secondly, he continued, the mechanization you speak of is not at all dangerous. A man may be a man, he emphasized this word, while working with machines. There is another kind of mechanization which is much more dangerous, being a machine oneself. Have you ever thought about the fact that all people themselves are machines? Yes, I said. From the strictly scientific point of view, all people are machines, governed by external influences. But the question is, can the scientific point of view be wholly accepted? Scientific or not scientific is all the same to me, said G. I want you to understand what I am saying. Look at all those people you see. And he pointed along the street. They are simply machines, nothing more. I think I understand what you mean, I said, and I have often thought how little there is in the world that can stand against the form of mechanization and choose its own path. This is just where you make your greatest mistake, said G. You think there is something that chooses its own path, something that can stand against mechanization. You think that not everything is equally mechanical. Why, of course not, I said. Art, poetry, thought are phenomena of a different order. Of exactly the same order, said G. These activities are just as mechanical as everything else. Men are machines, and nothing but mechanical actions can be expected of machines. Very well, I said, but are there no people who are not machines? It may be that there are, said G. Only not those people that you see. You do not know them. That is what I want you to understand. I thought it rather strange that he should be so insistent on this point. What he said seemed to me obvious and incontestable. At the same time, I had never liked such short and all-embracing metaphors. They always omitted points of difference. I, on the other hand, had always maintained differences were the most important thing, and that in order to understand things, it was first necessary to see the points in which they differed. So I felt it was odd that G insisted on an idea which seemed to be so obvious, provided it were not made into the absolute and exceptions were admitted. People are so unlike one another, I said. I do not think it would be possible to bring them all under the same heading. There are savages, there are mechanized people, there are intellectual people, there are geniuses. Quite right, said G. People are very unlike one another, but the real difference between people you do not know and you cannot see. The difference of which you speak simply does not exist. This must be understood. All the people you see, all the people you know, all the people you may get to know are machines, actual machines, working solely under the power of external influences. As you yourself said, machines are born and machines they die. How do savages, intellectuals, and intellectuals come into this? Even now, at this very moment, while we are talking, several millions of machines are trying to annihilate one another. What is the difference between them? Where are the savages? Where are the intellectuals? They are all alike. But there is a possibility of ceasing to be a machine. It is of this we must think, and not about the different kinds of machines that exist. Of course there are different kinds of machines. A motor car is a machine, a gramophone is a machine, a gun is a machine. But what of it? It is the same thing. They are all machines. In connection with this conversation, I remember another. What is your opinion of modern psychology? I asked G, with the intention of introducing the subject of psychoanalysis, which I had mistrusted from the time it had first appeared. But G did not let me get as far as that. Before speaking of psychology, we must be clear to whom it refers and to whom it does not refer, he said. Psychology refers to people, to men, to human beings. What psychology can there be in relation to machines? Mechanics, not psychology, is necessary for the study of machines. That is why we begin with mechanics. It's a very long way yet to psychology. Can one stop being a machine? I asked. Ah, that is the question, said G. If you had asked such questions more often, we might perhaps have gotten somewhere in our talks. It's possible. It is possible to stop being a machine. But for that, it's first necessary to know the machine. A machine, a real machine, does not know itself and cannot know itself. When a machine knows itself, then it's no longer a machine, at least not such a machine as it was before. It already begins to be responsible for its actions. This means, according to you, that a man is not responsible for his actions, I asked. A man is responsible. A machine is not responsible. In the course of one of our talks, I asked G, what, in your opinion, is the best preparation for the study of your method? For instance, is it useful to study what is called the occult or mystical literature? In saying this, I had in mind more particularly the tarot and the literature of the tarot. Yes, said G, a great deal can be found by reading. For instance, take yourself. You might already know a great deal if you knew how to read. I mean that if you understood everything you have read in your life, you would already know what you are looking for now. If you understood everything you have written in your own books, what is it called? And he made something altogether impossible out of the words tertium organum. I should come and bow down to you and beg you to teach me, but you do not understand either what you read or what you write. You do not understand what the word understand means. Yet, understanding is essential, and reading can only be useful if you understand what you read. But of course, no book can give real preparation, so it's impossible to say which is better. What a man knows well, he emphasized the word well, that is his preparation. If a man knows how to make coffee well or how to make boots well, then it's possible to talk to him. The trouble is that nobody knows anything well. Everything is known just anyhow, superficially. This was another of those unexpected turns which G gave to his explanations. G's words, in addition to their ordinary meaning, undoubtedly contained another, altogether different meaning. I had already begun to realize that in order to arrive at his hidden meaning, one must begin with their usual and simple meaning. G's words were always significant in their ordinary sense, although this was not the whole of their significance. The wider or deeper significance remained hidden for a long time. There is another talk which has remained in my memory. I asked G what a man had to do to assimilate his teaching. What to do? Asked G as though surprised. It is impossible to do anything. A man must first of all understand certain things. He has thousands of false ideas and false conceptions, chiefly about himself, and he must get rid of some of them before even beginning to acquire anything new. Otherwise, the new will be built on a wrong foundation, and the result will be worse than before. How can one get rid of false ideas? I asked. We depend on the forms of our perception. False ideas are produced by the forms of our perception. G shook his head. Again, You speak of something different, he said. You speak of errors arising from perceptions, but I'm not speaking of these. Within the limits of given perceptions, man can err more or err less. As I've said before, man's chief delusion is his conviction that he can do. All people think they can do. All people want to do. And the first question all people ask is what they are to do. But actually, nobody does anything. And nobody can do anything. This is the first thing that must be understood. Everything happens. All that befalls a man, all that is done by him, all that comes from him, all this happens. It happens in exactly the same way as rain falls as a result of the change in temperature in the higher regions of the atmosphere or the surrounding clouds, as snow melts under the rays of the sun, as dust rises in the wind. Man is a machine. All his deeds, actions, words, thoughts, feelings, convictions, opinions, and habits are the results of external influences, external impressions. Out of himself, a man cannot produce a single thought, a single action. Everything he says, does, thinks, feels, all this happens. Man cannot discover anything, invent anything. It all happens. To establish this fact for oneself, to understand it, to be convinced of its truth, means getting rid of 1,000 illusions about man, about his being creative, consciously organizing his own life, and so on. There is nothing of this kind. Everything happens. Popular movements, wars, revolutions, changes in government, all this happens. And it happens in exactly the same way as everything happens in the life of an individual man. Man is born, lives, dies, builds houses, writes books, not as he wants to, but as it happens. Everything happens. Man does not love, hate, desire. All this happens. But no one will ever believe you if you tell him he can do nothing. This is the most offensive and most unpleasant thing you can tell people. It's particularly unpleasant and offensive because it is the truth, and nobody wants to know the truth. When you understand this, it'll be easier for us to talk. But it is one thing to understand with the mind, and another thing to feel it with one's whole mass, to be really convinced that it is so, and never forget it. With this question of doing, in brackets, G emphasized the word, yet another thing is connected. It always seems to people that others invariably do things wrongly, not in the way they should be done. Everybody thinks he could do it better. They do not understand, and they do not want to understand, that what is being done, and particularly what has already been done in one way, cannot be and could not have been done any other way. Have you noticed how everyone is talking about the war? Everyone has his own plan, his own theory. Everyone finds that nothing is being done in the way it ought to be done. Actually, everything is being done in the only way it can be done. If one thing could be different, everything could be different. And then perhaps there would have been no war. Try to understand what I'm saying. Everything is dependent on everything else, and everything is connected. Nothing is separate. Therefore, everything is going the only way it can go. If people were different, everything would be different. They are what they are. So everything is as it is. This was very difficult to swallow. There is nothing, absolutely nothing, that can be done, I asked. Absolutely nothing. And can nobody do anything? That is another question. In order to do it, In order to do, it is necessary to be. And it is necessary first to understand what it means to be. If we continue our talks, you will see that we use a special language, and that in order to talk with us, it's necessary to learn this language. It's not worthwhile talking in ordinary language, because in that language it's impossible to understand one another. This also at the moment seems strange to you, but it is true. And in order to understand, it is necessary to learn another language. In the language which people speak, they cannot understand one another. You will see later on why this is so. Then one must learn to speak the truth. This also appears strange to you. You do not realize that one has to learn to speak the truth. It seems to you that it's enough to wish or decide to do so. And I tell you that people comparatively rarely tell a deliberate lie. In most cases, they think they speak the truth, and yet they lie all the time. Both when they wish to lie and when they wish to speak the truth. They lie all the time, both to themselves and to others. Therefore, nobody ever understands either himself or anyone else. Think, could there be such discord, such deep misunderstanding, such hatred towards the views and opinions of others, if people were able to understand one another? But they cannot understand because they cannot help lying. To speak the truth is the most difficult thing in the world, and one must study a great deal and for a long time to be able to speak the truth. The wish alone is not enough. To speak the truth, one must know what the truth is and what a lie is, and first of all, in oneself, and this nobody wants to know. Talks with G and the unexpected turn he gave to every idea interested me more and more every day, but I had to go to Petersburg. I remember my last talk with him. I had thanked him for the consideration he had given me, and for his explanations, which I already saw had changed many things for me. But all the same, you know, the most important thing is facts, I said. If I could see genuine, real facts of a new and unknown character, only they would finally convince me that I am on the right way. I was again thinking of miracles. There will be facts, said G, I promise you, but many other things are necessary first. I did not understand his last words then. I only understood them later, when I really came up against the facts, for G kept his word, but this was not until about a year and a half later in August 1916. Of the last talks in Moscow, there is still another which remains in my memory, during which G said several things, which again became intelligible only subsequently. He was talking about a man I had met while with him, and he spoke about his relations with certain people. He is a weak man, said G. People take advantage of him, unconsciously, of course, and all because he considers them. If he did not consider them, everything would be different, and they themselves would be different. It seemed odd to me that a man should not consider others. What do you mean by the word consider? I asked. I both understand you and do not understand you. This word has a great many different meanings. Precisely the contrary, said G. There is only one meaning. Try to think about this. Later on, I understood what G called considering, and I realized what an enormous place it occupies in life, and how much it gives rise to G called... How much it gives rise... let me read this sentence again. Later on, I understood I understood what G called considering, and realized what an enormous place it occupies in life, and how much it gives rise to. G called considering that attitude which creates inner slavery, inner dependence. Afterwards, we had occasion to speak a great deal about this. I remember another talk about the war. We were sitting in Filipov's cafe, and it was full of people. It was very noisy. War and profiteering had created an unpleasant, feverish atmosphere. I had even refused to go there. G insisted, and as always with him, I gave way. I had already realized by then that he sometimes purposely created difficult situations and conditions for conversation, as though demanding of me some sort of extra effort and a readiness to reconcile myself to unpleasant and uncomfortable surroundings for the sake of talking with him. But this time the result was not particularly brilliant because, owing to the noise, the most interesting part of what he was saying failed to reach me. At first I understood that what G was saying, but the thread gradually began to slip away from me. After several attempts to follow his remarks, of which only isolated words reached me, I gave up listening and simply observed how he spoke. The conversation began with my question, "Can war be stopped?" And G answered, "Yes, it can." And yet I had been certain from previous talks that he would answer, "No, it cannot." "But the whole thing is how," he said. "It is necessary to know a great deal in order to understand that. What is war? Is it the result of planetary influences? Somewhere up there, 2 or 3 planets have approached too near to each other. Tension results. Have you noticed how if a man passes quite close to you on a narrow pavement, you become all tense? The same tension takes place between planets. For them it lasts perhaps a second or two, but here on Earth people begin to slaughter one another, and they go on slaughtering maybe for several years. It seems to them at the time that they hate one another, or perhaps that they have to slaughter each other for some exalted purpose, or that they must defend somebody or something, and that it's a very noble thing to do, or something else of the same kind. They fail to realize to what an extent they are mere pawns in the game. They think they signify something. They think they can move about as they like. They think they can decide to do this or that. But in reality, all their movements, all their actions are the result of planetary influences, and they themselves signify literally nothing. When the moon plays a big part in this, then the moon plays a big part in this, but we will speak about the moon separately. Only it must be understood that neither Emperor Wilhelm, nor generals, nor ministers, nor parliaments signify anything or can do anything. Everything that happens on a big scale is governed from outside and governed either by accidental combinations of influences or by general cosmic laws. This was all I heard. Only much later I understood what he wished to tell me, that is, how accidental influences could be diverted or transformed into something relatively harmless. It was really an interesting idea, referring to the esoteric meaning of sacrifices. But in any case, at the present time, this idea has only an historical and psychological value. What was really important, and what he said quite casually, so that I did not even notice it at once and only remembered it later in trying to reconstruct the conversation, was his words referring to the difference of time for planets and for man. And even when I remembered it, for a long time I did not realize the full meaning of his idea. Later, very much was based on it. Somewhere about this time, I was very much struck by a talk about the sun, the planets, and the moon. I do not remember how this talk began, but I remember that G drew a small diagram and tried to explain what he called the correlation of forces in different worlds. This was in connection with the previous talk, that is, in connection with the influences acting on humanity. The idea was roughly this: humanity, or more correctly, organic life on Earth, is acted upon simultaneously by influences proceeding from various sources and different worlds. Influences from the planets, influences from the moon, influences from the sun, influences from the stars. All these influences act simultaneously. One influence predominates at one moment, and another influence at another moment. And for man, there is a certain possibility of making a choice of influences. In other words, of passing from one influence to another. To explain how would need a very long talk, said G. So we will talk about this some other time. At this moment, I want you to understand one thing. It is impossible to become free from one influence without becoming subject to another. The whole thing, all work on oneself, consists in choosing the influence to which you wish to subject yourself and actually falling under this influence. And for this, it is necessary to know beforehand which influence is the more profitable. What interests me in this talk was that G spoke of the planets and the moon as living beings, having definite ages, a definite period of life, and possibilities of development and transition to other planes of being. From what he said, it appeared that the moon was not a dead planet, as it's usually accepted to be, but on the contrary, a planet in birth, a planet at the very initial stages of its development, which it had not yet reached the degree of intelligence possessed by the Earth, as he expressed it. But moon is growing and developing, said G, and sometime it will possibly attain the same level as Earth. Then, near it, a new moon will appear, and the Earth will become their moon. At one time, the sun was like the Earth, and the Earth like the moon, and earlier still, the sun was like the moon. This attracted my attention at once. Nothing had ever seemed to me more artificial, unreliable, and dogmatic than all the usual theories of the origin of the planets and solar systems, beginning with the Kant-Laplace theory down to the very latest, with all the additions and variations. The general public considers these theories, at any rate, the last one known to it, to be scientific and proven. But in actual fact, there is, of course, nothing less scientific and less proven than these theories. Therefore, the fact that G's system accepted an altogether different theory, an organic theory, having its origin in entirely new principles and showing a different universal order, appeared to me very interesting and important. In what relation does the intelligence of Earth stand to the intelligence of the sun? I asked. The intelligence of the sun is divine, said G, but Earth can become the same, only of course it's not guaranteed, and Earth may die, having attained nothing. Upon what does this depend? I asked. G's answer was very vague. There is a definite period for a certain thing to be done. If by a certain time what ought to be done has not been done, the Earth may perish without having attained what it could have attained. Is this period known? I asked. It is known, said G, but it would be no advantage whatsoever for people to know it. It would be even worse. Some would believe it, and others would not believe it, and yet others would demand proofs. Afterwards, they would begin to break one another's heads. Everything ends this way with people. In Moscow at that time, we also had several interesting talks about art. These were connected with the story which was read on the first evening that I saw G. At the moment, it is not yet clear to you, G once said, that people living on the earth can belong to very different levels, although in appearance they look exactly the same. Just as there are very different levels of men, so there are very different levels of art. Only you do not realize at present that the difference between these levels is far greater than you might suppose. You take different things on one level, far too near one another, and you think these different levels are accessible to you. I do not call art all that you call art, which is simply mechanical reproduction, imitation of nature, or other people, or simple fantasy, or an attempt to be original. Real art is something quite different. Among works of art, especially works of ancient art, you meet with many things you cannot explain, and which contain a certain something you do not feel in modern works of art. But as you do not realize what this difference is, you very soon forget it and continue to take everything as one kind of art. And yet there is an enormous difference between your art and the art of which I speak. In your art, everything is subjective. The artist's perception of this or that sensation, the forms in which he tries to express his sensations, and the perception of these forms by other people. In one and the same phenomenon, one artist may feel one thing, and another artist quite a different thing. One and the same sunset may evoke a feeling of joy in one artist and sadness in another. Two artists may strive to express exactly the same perceptions by entirely different methods, in different forms, or entirely different perceptions, in the same forms, according to how they were taught, or contrary to it, as the spectators, listeners, or readers will perceive, not what the artist wished to convey or what he felt, but what the form in which he expresses his sensations will make them feel by association. Everything is subjective and everything is accidental, that is to say, based on accidental associations. The impression of the artist and his creation, the perception of the spectators, listeners, or readers. In real art, there is nothing accidental. It is mathematics. Everything in it can be calculated. Everything can be known beforehand. The artist knows and understands what he wants to convey, and his work cannot produce one impression in one man and another impression on another, presuming, of course, people on one level. It will always, and with mathematical certainty, produce one and the same impression. At the same time, the same work of art will produce different impressions on people of different levels, and people of lower levels will never receive from it what people of higher levels receive. This is real objective art. Imagine some scientific work, a book on astronomy or chemistry. It's impossible for one person to understand it in one way and another in another way. Everyone who is sufficiently prepared and who is able to read this book will understand what the author means, and precisely as the author means it. An objective work of art is just such a book, except that it affects the emotional and not only the intellectual side of man. Do such works of objective art exist in the present day, I asked. Of course they exist, answered G. The Great Sphinx of Egypt is such a work of art, as well as some historically known works of architecture, certain statues of gods, and many others. There are figures of gods and various mythological beings that can be read like books, only not with the mind but with the emotions, provided they are sufficiently developed. In the course of our travels in Central Asia, we found in the desert at the foot of the Hindu Kush, Kush, a strange figure which we thought at first was some ancient god or devil. At first it produced upon us simply the impression of being a curiosity, but after a while we began to feel that this figure contained many things, a big, complete, and complex system of cosmology, and slowly, step by step, we began to decipher the system. It was the body of the figure, in its legs, in its arms, in its head, in its eyes, in its ears, everywhere. In the whole statue there was nothing accidental, nothing without meaning, and gradually we understood the aim of the people who actually built the statue. We began to feel their thoughts, their feelings. Some of us thought that we saw their faces, heard their voices. At all events, we grasped the meaning of what they wanted to convey to us across thousands of years, and not only the meaning, but all the feelings and the emotions connected with it as well. That, indeed, was art. I was very interested in what G had to say about art. His principle of the division into art into subjective and objective told me a great deal. I did not understand everything he put into these words. I had always felt in art certain divisions and graduations, which I could neither define nor formulate, but which nobody else had formulated. Nevertheless, I knew that these divisions and graduations existed, so that all discussions about art without the recognition of these divisions and graduations seemed to me empty and useless, simply arguments about words in what G had said, in his indications of the different levels which we fail to see and understand. I felt an approach to the very gradations that I had felt but could not define. In general, many things which G said astonished me. There were ideas which I could not accept and which appeared to me fantastic and without foundation. Other things, on the contrary, coincided strangely with what I had thought myself and what I had arrived at long ago. I was most of all interested in the connectedness of everything he said. I already felt that his ideas were not detached one from another, as all philosophical and scientific ideas are, but made one whole, of which, as yet, I only saw some of the pieces. I thought about that in the night train on the way from Moscow to Petersburg. I asked myself whether I had indeed found something that I was looking for. Was it possible that G actually knew what had been known in order to proceed from words or ideas to deeds, to facts? I was still not certain of anything, nor could I formulate anything precisely. But I had an inner conviction that something had already changed for me, and that now everything would go differently.